for joining this afternoon. This is really, really lovely to be sitting here and listening and to be now reading. So, yeah, thank you so much. While the moon was above and looking elsewhere, the men came in under the night, took every flower in the yard except one. They left it for the bees and for the wind to make laugh, for the sun to caress with invisible strands of hair, and for him to turn over in his hands and for his fingers to brush his tenderness across, that he might be remembered of still having such in these evenings of gentle ink, when everything becomes a river that flows nowhere, that he might have a soft lightness touching against his skin, a way to remember that a true going is also an arriving, that he might, in the sitting of the dark water song of the night, submerged in that which is quiet and heavy and rising, have something light in his hands, that he might, like a dirge, rise with the river as well, and so this, the reason they leave him one, for these evenings, for that evening, for this evening, the men who come always leave one, while they carry the rest of summer's flowers, stolen and slung in bags over their shoulders, wading the long water and threading the tall grass of the sunken meadow, waiting to bring them to another place, just as others are on their journey to bring the petals of a palace that sits on the other side of another mountain to here. Somewhere between the bodies of the dark house and the gardens, I could smell. I dreamt a pack of dogs. I followed them. They led me through the woods, and we ended up at a campsite that the stars used when on Earth. The tents were still pitched, but all empty, and no constellations to be seen, like they had left in a hurry or like they would be back shortly. The dogs sniffed at the campfire remains. I dreamt I looked at the sky. It looked like a swept floor. I imagined a giant broom. How empty it sounded. In the dream, I sat on a log. In the dream, the dogs began to howl. In the dream, I scratched a stick through the ashes and then joined them in the howling under the sky. How strange that for something to sound empty, it has to make noise inside something else. I felt like we were pouring water down the sink of an abandoned house. A man in a long red cloak walked out of the trees. We stopped howling and watched him. I dreamt he asked to sit with us. Me and the dogs nodded. The man told us he was a writer of operas. He had a practice of writing an opera, then burying it and digging it up a year later. He said he was constantly writing operas and burying them. It seemed like every day a year had passed since one of his operas had been buried, so he was always digging one back up to finish it. He said the time the opera spent away from him, the time they spent in the earth, allowed something to happen. He didn't know if the things that happened were him not remembering the notes fully or the earth actually changing the compositions. He said he felt it didn't really matter which one it was. The music was the music. He said he had heard the water we were pouring out with our bodies, and incidentally, we were in the same place he had buried an opera last year. He asked if we would help him dig it up. I looked at the dogs. The dogs said nothing. I dreamt I took a shovel from the man's outstretched hand and began lifting the ground with it. I looked over at him. He was singing softly as I shoveled. He sounded like the only canary left in the tunnel, and his cloak was red as the blood of the maple tree. I dreamt I unburied the man's opera, that it looked like a small brass box. I dreamt he opened the box to show me what it looked like. Inside were two brown birds turning blue. They cleared their throats and started singing. It sounded like walking through a woods and hearing a creek not too far off. I sat in the hole I made, and the man in the red cloak closed his brass box of birds and began filling the hole back up. I dreamt the man said, "You are my opera now." And I said, "Yes." "And you are mine?" And he said, Yes, when next you unearth me, I will be very different, and I dreamt he covered me with the ground.
Wow.
So I have two more for y'all. This first one is about growing up down in New Orleans. It's called 4 Stars. There was a wasp nest on the back porch. It looked like dead honeycomb. Outside was a hornet's hive. I stuck my hand out there, and the sun buzzed loudly. Nothing could bite me. A caterpillar did. I'd climbed its tree. It kissed me with its back. Its hair was sharp enough to leave 4 stars spinning in my palm. The world spun through my arms and crashed onto our street, so I picked it up. At the back of the backyard, there was a tin shed falling apart. Inside it, I swear there was a giant sleeping. I woke him, told him my dreams, and led him humming back into our yellow kitchen. The countertops were always covered in topsoil. My mother, she loved to garden and to collect marbles inside of mason jars. We were never allowed to touch them. I loved the smell of the air conditioner. There was a window unit in the dining room and another in my parents' bedroom. Putting my face in front of its vents made me feel like Sunday. I could bike the whole square of the block in 3 minutes flat. My friends Jalal, Putt, and Rue, they lived around the corner from us. There was a tree in front of their house too big to be a birch. My friend Sam lived 2 fence hops away. His mother showed mine what God looked like. God, he smelled like my father. Both their beards were black bears. Me and Mom, we went fishing in the park. I caught 2 catfish and waited for them to die. They swim in circles inside of our refrigerator because no one had ever taught me how to kill anything. In Mississippi, we ate every single perch that I caught. The grasshoppers there, they're the size of an almond joy. My sister, she had a pet rat. Part of its ear was gone. His name was Pierre. I named my pet mouse after a favorite book, Charlotte's Web. She is buried under a white rock in the backyard the day our dog died. Pops found him hanging from the clothesline. I cried into my pillow. I was 10 years old. I could fit under the house. My knees didn't care. Neither did the dark. After the hallway, after the bath, the hallway from the bathroom to mine was a dark tunnel that breathed only to swallow me whole. I shivered and was more afraid of that walk than anything ever since. Even now, there are moments where it still shakes me, but there were times when the night sat beside me on my bed quietly, like it was a big man who had to do what I told him to do. He was too dumb, or he loved me too much. Either way, he had the same smile. I had never been stung by a bee before. Not my whole life. Not my whole life. Thank you all so very, very much for spending your Sunday afternoon with us. Sometimes I would lay in the garden and pretend I was a carrot. Sometimes I would curl under the leaves and I became a head of lettuce. Sometimes I would bury my soft paws in the softer earth and I was a rabbit. Sometimes in the garden I was a rock, was sometimes wishing I were 2 rocks, was sometimes becoming 3 rocks. Sometimes in the garden as a rock I waited hundreds of years and it was only the wind that touched me. Sometimes I waited thousands of years and not even the wind could move me. Sometimes in the garden as a rock, night would arrive with a large moon, full and glowing like the skin of an orange-skinned woman in a more orange dress, and the night would use that moon to say to me, look, you are like how I am, and see how bright my body sometimes becomes. Sometimes in the garden, I would wait for spring. Always, I wait for spring, and for my love to return like it, out of the cold, and with flowers on their fingertips. Thank you very much.